The last part of today is going to be digging into a slightly less codey lecture. It's a very coding heavy start to this course. Like the first 4 or 5 weeks are just like code, lots of programming. But the latter parts of the course are a bit more like theoretical. And this lecture is kind of one of them, which is a topic called coding together, working as a team. It's part of the theme of learning how to work together, like with Git. And this one is specific to how do you actually, not at a coding level, but how do you like work together as people? Because, Git was all about how do you work together as coders, in a sense. But this is more about people, or a software engineer or something. It's obvious why this is important. And we're going to be talking about Agile practices, stand-ups, sprints, task boards, meeting and minutes. We're going to be talking about quite a few things here. So, what I think I want to preface this is that I could talk a lot about teamwork. I could talk to you about for hours, right? There's on my YouTube page, there's a talk on it for like 2 hours, right? It's about like how to get the most out of people, how to have them work together. Could talk about my experiences leading, a company of 20 or some student groups of 10 to 70. There's like lots and lots of stuff there. But what I've found genuinely is that for the majority of you, this is the first time you've meaningfully worked together with people in an engineering project. And what's hard about that is that if we get kind of too abstract or, kind of hear all the lessons to learn, it often falls on deaf ears quite a bit. If it's really early people, it's a little bit like if you've never flown a plane and I just tell you how to fly a plane and I show you some slides for an hour. It's like cool, but until you're actually there, plane's a bad example. Until you're there and you've made some mistakes, which you don't want to do in plane, of course. Maybe a better example would be like, how to, bake a cake or something, until you've actually like felt it, until you've like bake a cake. Let's stick with that, right? Like until you've actually gone and said, well, I feel this part was more stressful than I thought. This part was easier than I thought. Once you have that, it's actually really easy to then go in and talk really practically about teamwork. So I'm a big advocate for trying to structure your program in a way where like in 1531, we talk about a lot of fundamentals, but as you go further through your degree, other courses can dig a bit deeper into some nuanced stuff, So we'll still talk about a lot today, but I just want to convey that I don't think this is complete, totally enriched as much as it could be. I just think that it would not be a great use of our time at this point in your journey. So firstly, it's a bunch of stuff here. Firstly, we're going to talk about Agile. Have you heard the term Agile before? Most people have heard the term Agile. It's thrown around a bunch. We're an Agile company. We're part of an Agile team. We want to see you have experiences with Agile practices, Agile methodologies. It's talked about all the time, but we want to understand a bit more about what it has to do with computing. And if you have heard the term before and you've heard it in a bit more detail, a really common way you hear it is when people talk about sprints or scrum masters or something. And these are all ideas about how to structure a team in an agile way, as if it's a very heavy framework kind of thing, like a soccer team has, like a netball team has, goal defense and centers and goal attacks and a whole bunch of stuff like this, right? And most sports do. And it's painting agile in that kind of way. And whilst that's true, and there's a lot of merit in that, and there'd be a bunch of companies that approach it like this, we more want to actually talk about the philosophies and principles that inform the agile methodology, because agile development is very much a philosophy. But once you start getting into the whole sprint, scrum master and stuff like that, it really gets more into a particular practice, which is derived from that philosophy, but we're less interested in an interpretation of the philosophy in a practice and more, focused just on the philosophies themselves. And this is just a web page out there, agilemanifesto.org, which highlights really the key tenets of what informs agile development. And this is summarized by 4 key points, which is that agile focuses a lot more on individuals and interactions rather than processes and tools. What this means is that talking is more important than how GitLab works. actually having a good relationship with the people you work with and being able to communicate with them and discuss with them and negotiate with them is just better than, what you can automate through GitLab. Working software is more important than comprehensive documentation. This is the idea that as much as possible, we always want software to work fundamentally rather than kind of have like a clear documentation of how the software should work, but it doesn't work, right? Because like strong documentation is important always, but most of the time we're building software, because these are generalizations again, right? And not all of them can be applied everywhere. We care about software working more than we care about it being well documented. And a big part of this is because a lot of software, frankly, is it doesn't live very long. My colleague Rob often talks about the half-life of software, right? Most of you have done science in school. What's the half-life of a uranium isotope, right? It's like, okay, you write some code and most code has a half-life, a period by which, a short half-life. Everything has a half, well, not every, like a lot of code can have short half-lives in the sense that within 12 months, a lot of code's either changed or removed or rewritten, so sometimes it's really focused on just getting the software working, because documentation often in reality can need to change much faster than it does, which can make it useless, again, depending on the context. It says that customer collaboration is more important than contract negotiation. This is really just a way of saying that, when you're building software, it shouldn't just be like you sit down with someone, at the start of the year and you decide what you're going to do and that's what you do for the rest of the year. But it's actually saying you need to talk to people and have an ongoing dialogue with them, because things change, people change, as people learn more, they understand more, etc. And then the fourth one is that responding to change is much more important than following a plan. This kind of ties into the previous comment, but it's a bit broader than that, which is that, even what you do as a team, you decide to do this next fortnight. Sometimes things change, sometimes things come up, sometimes there are bugs you need to fix or issues you didn't realize were as large, and you can't get too fixated on what the plan was. You need to be quite adaptable. So that's essentially like, a set of agile philosophies, if you will. And the summary: Agile is a philosophy and culture that's used to inform a range of different processes. The processes that you take on are really kind of up to you to an extent. And whilst these processes will change between teams and organizations, most of those philosophies and principles will carry through, frankly. Unless you're dealing with very unique kind of software. Because again, a lot of this kind of agile approach pays itself very well to most software, which is focused on kind of speed and customer satisfaction, whether that customer is a large organization or an individual person. But there's always times where that isn't true. One thing that's talked about a lot in Agile is like Agile versus Waterfall. You kind of see this idea where it's like the Waterfall method of engineering is that it's like the software development lifecycle, except you start with your requirements. You finish with testing and all of this. And you might be thinking implementation and testing don't look the right way, Hayden. Why are they that way? You said they should be the other way. Well, a lot of these rules we have are generalized across engineering. And one of the things is that a lot of engineering practices kind of most fundamentally derive from like civil engineering in a lot of ways, right? Like it's kind of one of the oldest forms. Electrical engineering didn't exist a couple hundred years ago. Software engineering didn't exist 60 years ago, something like that. So like civil, you think of buildings, right? When you look at most classic engineering, think of buildings. In buildings, you figure out what you got to build, you get some blueprints together, you build the thing, you make sure everything in it works, and then you give it to someone. And then if you're in Sydney and it's, pre-stressed concrete, it breaks and something, it's not funny. If anyone lives or has parents who bought a defective property, I am sorry. It's actually a horrific issue we have that I hope is resolved soon. But, civil buildings, you can kind of picture it. And software engineering, we do actually tend to move through things in a similar way. It's just that we, instead of them being like a start and a finish, we just loop through them, like we just go round and round and round the bend. Daily, weekly, monthly, like whatever you're doing. And we saw that at the very beginning with the software engineering life cycle. etc. So yeah, that's it. That's Waterfall in a nutshell. And this has no bearing on what you do. It's more just to point out that these aren't two wildly different things. There's kind of this idea that, there's like Waterfall and Agile, and it's like, well, most people kind of end up iterating anyway. Even like, construction projects, you build stuff and you still learn things and then you modify it. It's not really about these two different philosophies. It's often just about nuance, and it's about pacing and cycles, Like in software, you can work in really tight cycles that you don't work with in other industries. And industries move in different directions all the time, right? Like, like mechanical engineering, you're seeing a lot now where they're actually figuring out ways to kind of fabricate things cheaply and quickly, like test things. Because like when you do mechanical engineering, you'll figure out what you're trying to build, you'll design it. Before you mass produce it, though, you're going to have to test it, and sometimes those testing cycles historically might have taken a really long time. But nowadays you can get them down much quicker because of modern manufacturing methods, or like 3D printing. Think about how much easier it is now when you can 3D print your thing, see if it works, and then go and get it built with, Ali or some other proper mechanism. That was a bit of a ramble, but you get the point. So Agile is all about saying, okay, we get that whole classic world of engineering where we used to build those buildings and it would take a few years, but our objective is to apply these philosophies that help us like plan, build, test, release all as quickly as possible. And the aim of the game is to iterate as fast as possible whilst building good software. So I think it's a slightly broader thing than that too, because it's not just build software faster, because that's true, right? We do build software faster because of these processes. But the second element, which is kind of touched on here, is these comments about customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Because where software is wildly different to other types of engineering is it's never had this intense consumer interaction before. You used to buy a car, you got the car. Maybe you didn't like some things about the car. You didn't have this capacity to kind of like change cars. Like you can go from Netflix to Disney Plus and Disney Plus to... what else Apple TV, So there's this, it's a whole different world of how as engineers we interact with people in the software space. It's so close and tight and fast and critical and intolerant, and therefore a lot of what we do with Agile is also just about helping bridge that relationship, because that's part of why we want to build things quickly too. If we build things quickly, we can take on feedback and build them quicker, right? Like you like services that will adapt fast, and like you've seen this, like I nearly stopped using WhatsApp at one point because you couldn't react to messages, and it was annoying me because like every other app like Telegram, Signal, Messenger, like we're like Snapchat, we're all doing it, and WhatsApp didn't, and WhatsApp just like fixed it after some, I don't know, months or something. But the point is that this kind of ability to engage with people and interact quickly is just critical to about like 95% of software you're all going to work in, which is consumer facing software, right? Yeah, and I said that we're going to talk a lot about principles, not processes, but sorry. Right. But one process that's quite useful to talk about is a sprint. It's something that we can loosely touch on in this course, and essentially a sprint is like a fixed amount of time, e.g. week or fortnight, where you set a number of tasks to be completed. And the idea of the sprint is that it's a fixed amount of time, not a fixed scope. Sometimes this is kind of different to how you might typically, interact with something, which is like you sit down with your friends and you say, we're going to build this thing. We're going to build a table, and you just kind of, you get it built. Maybe it takes a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. You work till it's built. Then you say, we're done. What are we going to do next? Whereas sprints are another way of saying it, which is like, let's do this. Let's build a table. But rather than the done point being the table built, the done point is actually 1 day. It's an amount of time. So then you say, okay, we're going to build the table this week. Then next week, it doesn't matter If you haven't built the table, you have built the table, you sit down and you say, what are we going to do this week? So the idea is really tying things. It's not a very complicated concept, right? But the idea is just tying up your workloads into time-based rather than scope-based. And what it's really helpful for is it's helpful for you to always have like a check-in point. Because, introspection and points of reflection are really important when it comes to any kind of engineering project and frankly, projects in general. So that's the case also with software. And it's really cool because like what this means is that you and your team should meet once a week. I'd recommend your team generally meets like twice a week formally. But like once a week's enough. And it's like, the point is, it doesn't matter if all of you didn't do anything. If you all didn't do anything, you still meet up and you still talk about it to plan how you're going to do these things next week. Because otherwise you fall into the trap. Oh, we haven't done enough, so there's no point meeting. That's a very bad recipe if you're all busy people, which you are because you're students. You got some stuff going on in your life beyond this. We don't expect you to be so methodical in this course. Like we can call them sprints if we want, but all we're really asking you to do is make sure you meet once a week. We just kind of talk about sprints as an idea. This might be a lot more relevant as you hit the workplace. Okay, there's a few kind of teamwork related things to chat through. How do we stay in sync? How do we track our tasks? What are some basic practices? And then how do we handle conflict? So, firstly, number one was like staying in sync. Stand-ups. Stand-ups were an idea that came out of Agile, a lot of Agile stuff, which were, or at least was popularized by Agile stuff. I don't know if it came out of it, which is to say that wouldn't it be great if frequently, ideally every day, the team meets, talks about things quickly. It's a short meeting, 3 minutes, 15 minutes, something in that. And you answer a few questions. What did I do since I last saw you yesterday? What issues did I face? Maybe what am I going to do what am I going to do between now and the next time I see you? And it really has two very useful purposes in my view. One is that it again forces you to stay in check. It really forces you to like reflect because you can't do work every day. You can't be productive every day. In fact, even if you are a full-time employee, you might not have output every day. Some days might just be really hard, but having that ability to say, yeah, okay, I didn't do anything again today. I'm still trying to finish the same thing. Having to even say that out loud helps you keep track of yourself and not burrow into that part of your brain that's really good at ignoring shit, right? Whereas and similarly to people you work with, it's a signal to them that maybe you need some help. They'll ask you, what can I do? Stand-ups, a typical time, usually I think stand-ups happen is sometime between like 10 and 12 at a lot of companies. When I was interning at Microsoft, I think we had ours at 10:30. I think, I don't know. That was like the latest I could get to work. That's what I remembered. My, boss would not be happy if you weren't there for stand-up. But nowadays, COVID-19 in particular has accelerated a movement towards asynchronous stand-ups. Asynchronous stand-ups are not the same as like online stand-ups. Like obviously nowadays, pretty much no tech company I know of really would have the entire team there in person at the same time every day. So a lot of stand-ups will happen online now. That's pretty much the normal. But another thing that started to happen with COVID was asynchronous stand-ups, which was like, rather than you all have to be there at the same time or even be on a call at the same time, there was just like a 2-hour window or 1-hour window every morning, or say between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. where you would just type this stuff in a chat. Maybe you'll have like a stand-up channel on MS Teams or something, and you just like type what you did and you can kind of interact that way. It works really well for big teams. It works really well, particularly in your case where there's no suitable time typically for everyone because you've all got different timetables. But the downsides are that if there are issues, it's really hard to address them because someone says something in the morning and then you ask a question at 10 a.m. and then they reply at 1 p.m. because they were busy and they're going to work tonight. So there's like some downsides to it. It's also really easy to forget because you don't have that kind of structure in your day. I'm like most people. You tell me to do something every day, I'm going to put it in my calendar and find a reason to forget or get too busy, It's also a little less personal, and people are less likely to read it because, if you're standing in a room with someone or on a call and they're talking at you, it's much harder to ignore them than a bunch of messages that if you don't read, you'll probably be okay. That's the problem. Daniel says, how do daily asynchronous stand-ups function with the fact that people don't work on the project every day? So one thing that's important here that I might have glossed over is I'm telling you about this concept broadly, but for the sake of the project, we mostly just expect you to meet semi-regularly like this, or message. Daily is fine. I would encourage groups, if you can have the discipline to do it daily, you will perform better than other groups. I tell you that honestly, on average. But what is more likely, a more suitable approach for a typical 1531 group is to go, we're going to have a weekly meeting in our lab. Maybe it's a Tuesday. We're going to have a stand-up on Thursday, a stand-up on Saturday, a stand-up on Monday, online on Teams or something. Or maybe, there's a meeting on Saturday, 1 to 2 meetings a week, and you'd never really go more than 48 hours without having a moment where you come together. Because the project's short, it's 9 weeks. You're already at the end of the second week nearly for a bunch of people. One of them's flex week. You've got 7 meetings until you have to have a 60% assessment finish. It's not a lot. So don't get scared to have too many meetings. If you turn up and people are just we don't have anything to talk about, good. You had the discipline to stick to it, to turn up, and for all of you to express that you haven't done anything. It's an important moment in perspective, and don't stop doing that until you're all high performers. If you're a high performer, your team is just smashing through stuff, then sure. Don't even have meetings. Your tutor probably won't care if you're all geniuses who are working beautifully together and they see you on the street holding hands, laughing or something, don't actually skip meetings. But you get my point. It's don't try and cut corners if you aren't performing to your own standards. That's just a bad way to approach life. Another way is to just have these weekly meetings. I've talked about these. The one difference between weekly meetings and these stand-ups, the stand-ups are typically not where you change direction. A weekly meeting is what are we going to do this week? Like a sprint. You'll probably take some notes is a good approach. Record those notes. This is it written in the spec. Some of you have seen this when we talk about meeting minutes. And then in between then you have these kinds of stand-ups. And the structure of the meeting is often really simple. A typical 1531 group is probably going to have a weekly meeting somewhere between 10 minutes and an hour. Oh, an hour's too long. You wouldn't really have a meeting for an hour. Somewhere between it's not even that long because there's not much to talk about. Frankly, the 1531 project is not that big. It's a pretty tiny contained problem in reality, Doesn't mean it's easy to do, but there's not a lot to discuss. It's often just how are we going to break up work? What are we doing this week? Let's go and do that. But you might, keep some notes and take some notes here in the diagram. This is a 30-minute meeting. These are notes I took for that. Here's a meeting. Who came? What do we need to talk about? What were the notes? Not extensive notes. It's not much. Someone asked on the forum, I think. Maybe it was in the last lecture. I can't remember. Someone asked me last time, might have been the lecture, how detailed should the notes be? And I think I described it as detailed enough for you in a year to know what you were talking about. And when I read this here and I'm okay, do a 30-minute run through the mobile site for feedback. Okay, that I know. I know reading that. This is a year ago, literally, more nearly 2 years ago. I'm cool. Okay, that reminds me that I need to, look at our site on mobile and spend 30 minutes probably really looking at it and really looking for some issues. Another important part of working as a team is task tracking. There are lots of tools that. There are lots of tools out there on the internet that help you track tasks. There's, Trello and Jira. You can kind of do what you want. But just for ease in the course, we generally just recommend that you use the GitLab task board, because the GitLab task board just works, and it's for the scale of the project. You don't need a lot of crazy stuff. You're not a giant corporate with all these things going on. You're a bunch of clowns like me just trying to get by. So for 95% of the groups, like GitLab's going to be fine. But if I go to a group like T17C Dream, and you can find the taskboard by going to issues and then boards. And if you come here, I don't want to wreck their board, but I will. Basically, a board is kind of made up of columns, generally. Like a simple task board, Kanban boards and this and that. I don't want to get into that because it's all just really nuanced stuff. But the idea is you've got things to do. You've got tasks or tickets, which is basically who's doing it, what are they doing, and where is it up to? And the columns represent that where is it up to part. So when we look at something like GitLab here, you can see we've got open here and closed. Well, I feel like last term I had this, and there we go. I can make another one. Select the label. Oh no. Someone, this happened last term. Oh no. I forgot how to do it. Add to board. Oh, someone posted on the forum after and was like, you can add a label. Christ. You can add more columns here, and it's not hard. I'm just dumb. No idea how to add a label. I hope someone knows. Does anyone here know? There's only like 15 people here, so probably not. GitLab board label. I'm going to Google it this time. Labels. Types of labels. Assign labels. In the labels section of the sidebar. Labels? New label. In progress. Green. Yeah, so I can add a new column if I want, called in progress, I guess. Cool. And basically, like, what you can do as a team is you can come in here and be like, well, let's make a new task to do, which is like maybe, stub auth or stub all auth functions, right? And you create that, and then what you can do is you can assign it to someone. So for instance, in this case, I might assign it to, Yi. And now it's Yi's problem. And then like Yi might have 5 or 6 things here that they're working on this week, and then like as Yi does it, they'll be like, yeah, I'm working on this one today, and then once they're done, they move it over here, right? You can have different columns if you want. You can figure that out with your group. In general, most boards have 3 columns, which is, well, depends. This is kind of the basic. It's like, here's the stuff at work, I have them labeled out. There's like the stuff I'm gonna do, the stuff I'm doing, and the stuff I've done. That's the simplest thing. But larger projects will tend to have another column at the start, which they often refer to as the backlog. And the backlog is essentially stuff that you're not going to do, but eventually someone probably is going to do this. It's like, and you can see it over here on this screen. It's like the stuff way on the left here. It's a way of acknowledging that we can't forget something, but no one's actually got it on their plans right now. Okay, and then last couple of things. Pair programming. A really great way to work together as a team is to actually just get 2 programmers working on one computer, one keyboard. That's not 2 sets of hands on one keyboard. That's basically like you take turns to write code and you kind of sit together. Like I have my buddy over here who's like sitting behind me, and they will just be chatting to me as I program. I've done that a bunch in my life, particularly pre-COVID. It's probably a little less common now. Like, it's okay to do on calls, but if this makes sense, like, and maybe this is just my terrible attention span, I find it's really hard to do on calls because you got your computer there. It's all these things buzzing and friends messaging you. It was kind of much easier when you could sit next to people more frequently, even though we're starting to get back to that point. But the purpose of it's really quite simple and ideal. When there's 2 people, the person who's programming is actually writing the code. Like, the person behind them is not like, put an if statement there, like, name this variable that. The person behind them is often thinking at a slightly higher level, It's kind of like, and you can imagine this in many spots in life. It's like mowing the lawn. If you and your friend mow the lawn, they cut the grass. The person cutting the grass is really focused on lining up and cutting the grass and managing the machine, but you're kind of sitting there looking at all the grass, and paying a bit more attention, thinking a little bit about, actually that section over there looks a little taller than that section over there. That kind of thing. So it can be a really great way to program, because someone can kind of be a bit higher level and be like, actually we need to take into account this use case. So a bit of discussion. It's something that's really fun. I definitely encourage you to try it out sometime. And then the last set of slides is handling conflict. This one is a new set of slides that I've added in just because I think this is kind of really helpful. Human relationships are wonderful and messy. If you ever have family members, friends, or partners, I'm sure if any of you have some or all of those three, you've experienced the messy and wonderful parts of things. Comp 1531 team members are no different. And we need to find ways to manage conflict in this project. And we're going to run through a few of them. There's kind of 7. There's like 7? It's like 7-ish ways. Most of them say the same thing, but we're going to start with scenarios. I don't want to give you lessons, I want to give you scenarios because I think they're a bit more practical. Let's say you come into a group and you think, I know more than my group members. That happens. You're not all of equal intelligence. I mean, half of you would know more than half of your group members, I guess, statistically, if things were well distributed. And then there'd be a small number of you that would know more than all of your group members. So what do you do if you're in that instance? Well, take a break. Go work on other assignments. Maybe you want to push a little bit harder to get your mark up. That's kind of up to you. That's your prerogative. But just generally, 1531 moves at a certain pace, and you kind of putting pressure on other people to go faster is not going to help. Should you expect them to do good work? Yeah, of course. You've got aspirations, and it's reasonable for you to put those aspirations on others. But what you don't want to do is be one of those people that's like, I know all these things about programming, my group doesn't, so I'm going to strong arm them into doing this and doing that, and you got to do it my way because you don't know what you're doing. It's like, as long as you get there in the end, that's the thing that matters. Don't let your extra knowledge kind of pollute the process of getting there. My group members aren't doing enough. See this one a few times. Well, communicate. This one need to be a bit more specific. Communicate to them on Microsoft Teams. Message them. Be like, hey, I have a problem. Not in a mean way. Just be like, hey, I've noticed you aren't doing a lot recently. What do you think? How are you feeling? And then what can we do to resolve it? If you approach if every time you feel conflict, approach it with two things. One is a desire to understand and empathize, and the other one is a clear need to have an action, right? And people often don't do both. Sometimes they'll do one. It's like the understand and empathy part's really important. It's not like you didn't do any work, Daniel. It's like, hey, Daniel, I see you haven't really pushed any code in 3 days, and I think the group's struggling a bit. Is everything okay? Daniel might be like, yeah, my one of my parents just died, or my dog or my cat just died. And it's like, okay, well, that changes the entire dynamic. You know what I mean? So it's like, you always have to approach these things with give everyone the benefit of the doubt first, I don't know if it's in the slides. I don't think so. And I say this every term to people. The advice I usually give to people is always try and ask 5 questions. And, so if someone annoys you, this is good relationship advice in general, right? If someone annoys you, just ask them questions. Don't test them. Don't lie to them. Don't be passive aggressive, but just ask questions. Say someone's ignoring you. Someone you like is ignoring you. Someone you're close to. It's very powerful to just ask them to start with, are you okay? Because if they say no, well, you're on a whole different thread of conversation. It's about their well-being, and now you're focused on them too, If they're like, yeah, I'm okay, you're like, have you been feeling any different lately? And it's like, I'm not talking about, this isn't group members, this is general advice. And they're like, no, not really. And then it's like, okay, well, just figure out if you're missing something. And then once you get deep enough, eventually you're like, a very small fraction of the time, you can then get into, there's clearly a problem here I need you to address. But if you start with that, you can always risk a whole bunch of misunderstandings, right? So it's like, just really focus in on understanding and empathy to start. But also, you can expect things of people. If you have a group member who's underperforming in your books, then ask them. But, don't wait 2 days for them to reply. You can expect things from people. You can expect them to engage with you in a reasonable time frame, And if you do get into a conversation where you do identify that, maybe they've been struggling, and this second part, always have a clear action in that scenario. It's not enough just to be like, oh yeah, I've had a hard week, I'll try better. Don't do that. It's really tempting because you want to be a nice person. And you don't want to put pressure on people who you feel like are struggling if you're not a poo-poo. So it's like, but in a nice way, like just help, like, a really common thing for me is like, if you're working with someone and they're not giving you what you want, talk to them. They'll be like, I've had a hard time, I'm doing my best. Just be like, that's cool. Tell me what I can expect from you. When are you going to get that work done? And they'll tell you, and it's like, good. Well, if they tell you and it's a terrible answer, then you can have a very specific conversation and be like, actually, you can't do that because so-and-so is relying on that. But then on the flip side, if they tell you and they say, oh, it's going to get done on Friday, now when it comes to Friday, you can actually have a conversation with them and be like, I was expecting this. This is problematic. We need to figure this out. Because if they just say, I'll do my best, you get to Friday and you have the same conversation with them again. Then they say, yeah, I'm nearly there. And you're like, oh, shit, what does that mean? Then you know what I mean? So it's like, be understanding and empathetic, but at the same time, don't walk away from conversations around problems or conflict without a clear sense of what happens next. Or you'll just be back there and you'll both be more stressed. Cool? Cool. So, my group members have disappeared. This one's not too bad. Message them. They don't know where they are. Message them. Message your tutor too and be like, this person's disappeared, and your tutor will take a note of it. Generally, if someone just disappears and they don't reply to anything, within like 48 to 72 hours, you should just work as if they're not going to reappear, because most of the time, like 95% of the time that someone disappears, they're either not coming back, they've dropped the course, they're having a really bad term and confrontation scares them, so they'll drop the course eventually, but in the meantime, they're just avoiding it. They're really sick, so when they do come back, it's not like they're going to reappear from hospital being like, hey guys, I finished everything while I was in the hospital. So, just move on without them. And there'll be like a 5% chance that they'll reappear. But if they reappear and you've done their work and they have less work to do, which results in them having a lower mark, well, that was on them, Like, sometimes we disappear, we make choices in life. Like, if someone wants to disappear for 5 days without communicating, it's going to impact their mark. Like, don't feel held ransom by that. No one should be sitting around saying, so-and-so hasn't replied for 5 days, we don't know what to do. They're gone. I'm not saying they are, but just get into that headspace. They're gone. Move on. Tiny chance they'll come back. Deal with that as it comes. They're probably not coming back, so you've reestablished reality. That's the way to deal with that. Always talk to your tutor as well, like in all these situations. My group members are merging in broken code. They're merging in code without approvals. Well, message them, talk to them. All this stuff really comes back to like, talk to them, try and resolve the problem, try and make sure that you have a clear definition of it being resolved. And if you have any issues or you're concerned, talk to your tutor. It's really that simple. If a group member gives you crap for like you asking them politely and friendly to fix something and they don't, just email your tutor, they'll help you out. I think one really important note too, as I said before, like ask questions, but the only thing I sometimes give this advice and people ask terrible questions. Just please don't ever be passive aggressive with people. I say this every term because it always happens. Someone's like, I'm going to listen to Hayden and I'm really annoyed that this team member is not working hard, so I'm going to ask them a question. The first question they ask is like, do you even give a shit about this group? And it's like, or like, are you interested in the success? Are you interested in making us miserable? It's like, don't ask dumb questions because then you're just a pain in the butt. So, always be a good person. Your group members are being rude. What if your group members are a bad person? Tell them to stop politely, then talk to your tutor if you don't resolve the issue. If your group members are being a genuinely bad person, like, maybe they're like being extremely derogatory or discriminatory, or they're stalking you or something very strange, don't try and engage with them in those extreme scenarios. Just talk to your tutor, or you can always email me too. That happens excessively rarely as far as the teaching staff are concerned and in terms of what they know. So don't be worried about that, but that's just a footnote. Generally, it's mainly just people being like, you know, you'll just ask them for stuff and they'll be like, meh. You'll be like, what? Talk to me, you know, like be an adult. So that's if you're not getting that. But all the trends you're seeing here, that if there's something goes wrong, try and engage with the person. Set some clear understandings. And if anything isn't solved, email or, you know, message your tutor. Generally, emails are probably better than MS Teams a lot of the time, but obviously you can go to just on MS Teams to your tutor. If they don't like it, they'll tell you, but you should always feel empowered to email your tutor. Try not to email me, because most of the time I'm just going to ask you, have you emailed your tutor? Because not because I don't like you, it's just there's no point in me getting involved because they know more than me. So typically what happens is you email your tutor, and if they don't know how to deal with it or they have problems with it, then they come to me and I can help them out. It's much kind of easier that way. So yeah, that's the end of this lecture. If you could, you know, leave some feedback, that would be immensely appreciated. Like always, love the feedback. And other than that, that's kind of it we have for this week. We will see you next week, I guess. Send you an email on Friday. Good luck with iteration 0 being due on Friday night. Iteration 1 will come out late weekend. We'll put that in the notice. Other than that, I'll see everyone on Monday. For those who've had class, hope you've had a good week. And for those who have yet to have class, enjoy your class this evening or tomorrow. So thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the afternoon.